Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here, Private Lenders Podcast. Thanks for checking it out. As always, sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com, our community for private and hard money lenders. Create a free account anytime. Come join the conversation. Check out all the trainings at hardmoneymastermind.com. Okay, so it is January 2023, and we are talking about goal planning and goal setting. And this is something that we've been very, very routine and regular on throughout our years in business, which is 20 or so now, and 15 of HMB specifically. When this change in year came around, I was talking to Jason and Ian Horowitz, who run a podcast focused on the real estate investing world called the Real Estate Reserve Podcast. Really good one. Check that out as well on YouTube or Apple Podcast. And they were doing an end of year show about goal setting for 2023. They were having a bunch of people on. They asked a number of us to record a short video of a minute or two of here's what my goals and things like that are, my planning for 2023. And I wasn't in the mode yet at the time. I was on vacation in Puerto Rico with my family, and I wasn't in goal planning mode yet. Just wasn't there. Too much holidays going on, too much travel, kids everywhere, all that stuff. And so I didn't submit a video. Because I didn't have the right stuff to say yet, because I had not yet wrapped my brain around what I want to do for this year. And, like I started with, we have a long history of goal planning every year, going back to, I remember when I was in the mortgage lending days before HMB, that was part of what the loan officers, like I was, were assigned to do every January. And it was very basic in terms of loan production, a little bit about marketing to get there. It was basically like a one-pager. But I started enjoying the process back then. I like the idea of putting it on paper, referring back to it frequently, and going to hit the goals. Like, people would do it different ways when we were just talking about loan production back in those days. Like, some people would make their goal really low so that they could easily achieve it and thought that somehow that made them look good. Some people were unrealistic about what they're going to do, like volume wise, and they're not going to hit that. And I always wanted to set mine just in terms of that. We're going to go into other stuff at the right number to hit. Achievable, not easy, that sort of thing. I think we can start a little bit with that kind of thing, and then we'll go into the rest of life and how it relates to goal planning.
Well, I think goals in general, you do longer term, shorter term, kind of medium term. Some goals might be something that you can accomplish tomorrow. Because all of a sudden you put it on paper and it's like, hey, I want to get around to this. And it's important enough that, hey, like, a lot of things don't take that long. And some things that are longer term, you're just doing the block and tackle stuff on a consistent basis to hit it. One of the things that I think we're probably both very proud of, and we share this experience a lot with people, is we both used to have a coach. His name was Tony. Pretty pricey, to be honest with you. But it ended up backing out, and we had him for years. We had him early on in HMB. And I remember, like, these are our goals, and we hit our 10-year goal in like year 3, right? Not by doing anything special besides like sticking with the formula and being accountable and just block and tackle all day, every day, over and over and over and over. And that snowball just grows so quickly. It's just like compound interest. Like, it just happens. You just keep feeding the beast, and it's doing it. And one of the nice things about hard money lending, private lending in general, especially if you're kind of just getting started and you don't have a huge portfolio to start with, like, it just grows quickly, right? It can grow very, very quickly. Like, year 1, we did 15 or 17 deals. Year 2, we doubled it. Year 3, we doubled it. Year 4, we doubled it. Year 5, we doubled it, right? So it's like massive, massive growth by just doing the same kind of block and tackle stuff. As you have a more of a mature business, and if you have if you're listening to this and you have a larger portfolio, or if you're successful in another field besides private lending, you probably can agree with this. As you grow and you kind of reach capacity is not the right word, but you reach kind of economy of scale, you got to figure out a way to expand other ways, start lending in different markets, participating with other folks, investing in other types of deals or assets, like figuring out ways that you can leverage other opportunities in order to grow.
Yeah, that's a good point, what you said a minute or so ago. And I've heard Tony Robbins say something similar many times, which is most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and way underestimate what they can achieve in 10. And that is a very, very true statement. And it's interesting as I'm looking on my other screen at well, first of all, I call it a brainstorm. I always start by calling the document a goals brainstorm, because for whatever reason, that makes it like less intimidating to me. Like, it doesn't have to be set in stone. It doesn't have to mean you have to hit every single one of these. Like, I want to hit a lot of different areas of life when I'm doing this. And I just find that calling the document a brainstorm makes it less intimidating, if that makes sense to anybody. And I like this process, and it's kind of evolved over the past few years, but I started with a section called What Worked Well in 2022. And I did a little review of last year of like, all right, where did we have wins, like business and personal wise? And I jotted down a number of things related to lending, investing, life stuff, exercise that I felt worked well last year. And I'm like, cool, good place to start. And then I have a section called Things to Improve. And I picked out a hand of 5 or 6 things from last year that I thought could be done better. And mind you, when you do this year after year for a couple decades, like a lot of the goals stay the same or similar. Like there's certain areas where I don't need to double what I'm doing. Like in terms of like, I don't just use an example of exercise. Like I'm pretty consistent with that. I don't need to double what I'm doing. That's looking pretty much like it was last year. Like, I mean, yeah. So after Things to Improve, I have another little section called Themes of the Year. Focus on what is most effective in this, this, and this. Focus on what will create the best experiences and memories and this, this, and this. And things to minimalize, things to cut back on, things to trim out. And I like starting with that before I get into the different section of like number goals and more specific stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. The important part is to do it, because if everyone thinks, oh yeah, I've got goals and they're all in my head, well, that's not a real goal until almost every goal that I've written down on paper has turned into reality. Almost every single one. And the ones that haven't are the ones that I look at over and over and over. And I'm like, you know what? Really isn't all that important to me. And I remember
when we were business coach too.
When we were working with Tony, it was the same thing. It's like, me holding you accountable and you telling me that you want to start working on these things and you're not doing it just shows me that it's not important to you. And that could be the case. And that's okay. Typically, like when I get in that, I'm sure all of you, if you're an entrepreneur or business owner or you're a motivated individual, you probably have these feelings where like you get into these brainstorming sessions with yourself and you just like daydream. It could be in the shower, it could be while you're driving, it could be wherever, right? And you know when those daydreams are going to come and you look forward to them, right? Because your mind just wanders into its own place, and it's one of the best things. And typically you come up with like, hey, I'm going to do this, 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 and like 10 really good ideas. Most of the time you don't write them down and then they all kind of wash away or they circle back later. But what I like to do is write them all down, and then you kind of circle back to them and you're like, yeah, this isn't all that important. Because it happens every day. Like I write them on my to-do list and I'm like, yeah, this isn't all that important. This isn't all that important. And then you narrow it down to some really good ones and you do it. And sometimes, you're just not in the right place to have or to implement a certain goal, right? Like you might think it's like, hey, I want to, hire this particular position, right? Like I really want this. And then as you obsess over it a little bit, you know what? Maybe I can do this position myself. Maybe I don't want to spend $50,000 on budget to do that. Or maybe I'm not ready inside my business to take the next step. And that's okay. But I like the fact of just kind of like brain dumping lots of different things and then kind of circle back in them. And as we've started this conversation, I brought up my 2023 goals. I'm looking through them and most of them are still pretty relevant, but there's some on there that's like, yeah, even though I wrote this down a few weeks ago, like maybe this isn't as important to me today as it was. And that's okay. And I'm going to continue to add things to them. And a lot of these things, some of these things are big. Some of these things are small. Some of these things are going to be achieved in one day. Some of these things are going to be like, hey, I got a lot of work to do on some of this stuff if I'm going to achieve this by December 31st, 2023.
Yeah, no, I also like to have a bunch of things down here, and like you said, it can be removed, it evolves. Like that's why I like to call it a brainstorm. Like it's an ever changing thing. And on the opposite side of that, I also appreciate like some of the guys who came onto the Real Estate Reserve podcast with their messages about goals for the year. A few of them had like 2. Now, do they probably have more than that in the scheme of life? Yes. But they're choosing to focus on, say, 2 things. Like one guy was like, I want to double the square footage of the amount of properties I own. And I want to get this particular property to 70% profit margin, something like that. That's it. That was his whole spiel. It took a minute. And I'm like, I appreciate that too, because that's focus. Yep. That's focus. Like when you have 2, and like, I'm sure it's a lot of other areas of life where you're trying to maintain and do the right stuff that you want to do. But when you have like that much focus related to a couple specific goals, they're probably going to hit it. The guys who say that, fast forward 12 months, they probably did that stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. And listen, if you want to relate your goals to private lending or hard money lending, it's not that challenging. We've done it over the years, and I'll give you an example. Let's say you have whatever, $1 million of your own money and $1 million of other investor capital, and you're trying to deploy that, before the end of the year, right? It could be a lot of things. You might have no money and you want to deploy $5 million of other people's capital. You might have $5 billion of your own capital and you just need to deploy that. However, the setup is, work backwards, figure out how many units that is, what's your average loan amount, back into how many leads you need, how many borrowers you need to talk to, how many capital investors you need to talk to. Like when we do private consulting with one-on-one or in small groups with some folks, it's the same concept. It's, hey, I want to raise $3 million before the end of the year. Okay, in order to do so, and I want to deploy $3 million for the end of the year. Okay, great. So you want to do $3 million in loans. Let's say none of them pay back between the date you originate them to the end of the year. They will, but let's just say they don't. Cool. Well, what's your average loan amount? Let's say it's $300,000. Okay, well, you need to do 10 deals. Or $150,000, you need to do 20 deals. Okay, how many leads do you need to do this many deals in order to raise capital from these many investors? How many, conversations you need to have? And, you put the end in mind and then you work your way backwards, right? And you take your goal sheet and you make subsections underneath each one of those. Okay, well, how many conversations do you need to have? How many capital investors do you need in order to do that? Now, how many conversations do you need to have with each capital investor? Like somebody could sit here right now and be like, hey, in 30 years from now, I want to have $1 billion. Like any number, like it doesn't matter. It could be 10 years from now, I want $1 billion. Like you can't laugh at that because the data won't lie if you're following the right formula, right? Like it just won't. Like what most people want as goals are typically so achievable that it's probably like, okay, well, you need to talk to 1 new capital investor per day. That's it. 1 new capital investor per day, 1 call a day. Maybe it's 1 a week, maybe it's 1 a month, whatever that case is. Or you need to talk to 1 borrower per day, right? Most folks, like you kind of started with, don't like, they're pretty attainable, especially when you break it down. And we learned this from Tony with a lot of our stuff. Like just break it down. Like the way we started was we did 10-year goals, 5-year goals, 2.5-year goals, 1-year goal, 6-month goals, 3-month goals.
That's right. I remember that.
1-month goals, 1-week goals. And we broke it down.
That's
and going from 10 years to 1 week is literally like, oh shit, that's all I got to do. This is easy.
Which is why we hit 10-year goals in 3 years.
Yeah. Because we were a lot more motivated than what it took. It was like, I'd be like, oh, I got to make 1 call in an 8-hour day. Great. How about I make 2 calls and I'm ahead of the game?
That's right. And it's really more about, and goals across the board, it's really more about consistency than anything. Like consistency is going to win out over like, a lot of talent or luck or anything else, just being consistent with the whole thing. But yeah, I like this time of year for this reason, like holidays wrap up, you get kind of refocused on everything. All that stuff is left in last year. And then you're just looking ahead to the next 12 months across the different aspects of life, what you can put on the calendar and the trips and the family stuff and business things and number goals. It's all just fun. I just like it, which is also why I didn't want to chime in on that podcast that one day, because I didn't have it yet. I didn't have it there. And I spent a lot of, since we were only half open on Monday, I spent a lot of Monday watching that entire podcast and typing out my own sheet. Right. And
Nice.
yeah. It was a quiet day. Phone wasn't ringing. And I got some good focus in on 2023 goals. And it was an enjoyable thing. Keep it up on my screen. I like to refer back to it often. And yeah, I hope you guys do the same out there in the private lenders world. If you ever are interested in taking the next step beyond this podcast and the mastermind group, we are, I believe, on a wait list currently for the Inner Circle. And the Inner Circle is 2 meetings a year here with us and the rest of the team, about 20 awesome lenders from around the country. The next meeting's in May. We are on a wait list, like I said, but to get on that list and to get a conversation in with our program director, check out Hard Money Mastermind, innercircle.com. And we will see you guys next time on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.